On April 14, 2025, a search team of 6 experienced outdoor professionals entered the remote eastern section of New Mexico's Gila wilderness to locate a missing wildlife researcher. Only one man returned. 17 days after their departure, James Blackwood was discovered by hikers on a rarely used Forest Service road 37 miles from the team's last known location. He had lost 43 pounds. His body showed signs of severe dehydration, exposure, and a series of wounds that the medical examiner would later describe as inconsistent with any known predator attack pattern. 3 of his companions were confirmed dead when their remains were recovered from an underground cavern system previously undocumented on any geological survey. The other 2 team members were never found. The official report cited a combination of flash flooding, wildlife attacks, and disorientation as probable causes for the deaths. Rescue personnel abandoned recovery efforts after the discovery of a nest of what they identified as an unknown arthropod species in the deeper sections of the cavern. What follows is the account of James Blackwood, the sole survivor of what locals now refer to as the Gila Darkness incident. My name is James Blackwood. I'm 46 years old. I worked as a wilderness guide and search and rescue volunteer with the Gila National Forest Service for 19 years before this happened. I'm half Apache on my mother's side, though I wasn't raised with much connection to that heritage. My father was Scottish-American, a forest ranger, who met my mother when she was working as a field biologist collecting plant samples in the Gila back in the 70s. I grew up in Silver City, right on the edge of the wilderness. I've spent more nights under stars than under a roof. I know every trail, creek, and ridge in the western half of the Gila. I thought I knew the eastern sections too. I was wrong. The team assembled at my request after Dr. Elena Vega was reported missing. Elena was a wildlife researcher from New Mexico State University studying the movement patterns of mountain lions. She'd been placing and maintaining trail cameras throughout the eastern Gila for about 9 months. She was experienced, careful, and had a satellite phone for emergencies. When she missed 3 scheduled check-ins, the university contacted the Forest Service. I was asked to lead the search because I'd worked with Elena before. She'd gone into a section of the wilderness known as the Black Range, specifically a deep canyon system that runs north-south along the eastern boundary. The locals call it Shadow Canyon. My grandmother called it something else in Apache. She told me never to go there. Robert Hayes was our medic, 48 years old, former Army combat medic with 3 tours in Afghanistan. 6 feet tall, built like he still did PT every morning, which he probably did. He had close-cropped gray hair and a beard trimmed to regulation length. Rob could treat anything from a snake bite to a gunshot wound with whatever he could find in his pack or the environment. He carried a custom medical kit that weighed 18 pounds. He once stitched my arm closed after a fall using fishing line and a sewing needle he sterilized in a campfire. He had a quiet way of speaking that made you believe everything would be fine. Rob was married with 2 grown children. His wife died of cancer 3 years before this happened. He told me once that working search and rescue was his way of maintaining control in a world where he couldn't control what mattered most. Rob was gone first. Michaela Johnson was our tracker. 35 years old, 5'6", lean and quick, with black hair usually kept in a tight braid, half Navajo, born on the reservation but raised in Albuquerque. She'd worked for the state wildlife department for 7 years, tracking problem bears and wolves. Before that, she was in the park service at Yellowstone. She could read sign better than anyone I'd ever met. She could tell you how many people had passed through an area, how recently, what they were carrying, and sometimes even what they were feeling based on subtle changes in their gait. Michaela carried a Glock 20 in 10mm with hollow points for bear defense. She didn't like guns but respected their necessity. She had a 7-year-old daughter who lived with her ex-husband in Santa Fe. Michaela was gone third. David Chen was our climbing specialist, 41 years old, 5'10", with the wiry strength of someone who'd spent his life defying gravity. David had summited all of the 7 peaks and had written 2 books on alpine rescue techniques. He'd moved from California to New Mexico after divorcing his wife 3 years ago. He worked as a climbing guide and instructor at an outdoor education center near Taos. David could ascend a sheer rock face faster than most people can climb a ladder. He carried specialized equipment that let him rig safety systems in almost any environment. He was the quietest member of our team, but when he spoke, it was always something worth hearing. David had a habit of flipping a worn silver dollar across his knuckles when he was thinking. I found that coin in the cave. David was gone second. Sam Winchester was our survival expert, 39 years old, 6'2", with a red beard that reached the middle of his chest, former Marine Force Recon, now running a wilderness survival school outside of Flagstaff. Sam could start a fire in a rainstorm, find water in a desert, and build a shelter from nothing but pine needles and determination. He carried a custom hunting knife with a 7-inch blade that he'd made himself. Sam had a loud laugh that seemed too big for his body. He was newly married to a woman he'd met when she attended his survival course. Her name was Lydia. She was pregnant with their first child. Sam was gone fourth. Elena's brother, Miguel Vega, insisted on coming with us. He was 33. A high school science teacher from Las Cruces with minimal outdoor experience, but a desperate need to find his sister. He was 5'8", stocky, with thick glasses and hands that showed chemical burns from lab accidents. Miguel was intelligent but inexperienced. He brought expensive gear that he didn't know how to use properly. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't have allowed him on a search team, but he had legal rights as next of kin, and his determination was useful. Miguel carried a framed photo of him and Elena at her PhD graduation. He looked at it every night before sleeping. Miguel was gone fifth. I should have listened to my grandmother. 6 months before Elena disappeared, I visited my grandmother on the reservation near Mescalero. She was 91 years old then and mostly blind, but her mind was still sharp. I told her I'd been working in the eastern Gila, mapping some of the less-traveled canyons. She grabbed my wrist with surprising strength and asked exactly where. When I mentioned Shadow Canyon, she went silent. Then she said something in Apache that I didn't fully understand. The closest translation would be, "the nest of those who wait beneath." She told me a story about how, when she was a girl, 7 men from her village went hunting in that canyon. None returned. When a search party went looking, they found evidence that something had dragged the men underground. The tribal elders sealed the entrance to a cave with prayers and warnings. My grandmother made me promise I would stay away from Shadow Canyon. I promised, but I didn't really believe. I respected her beliefs, but I had spent my adult life in these mountains without encountering anything supernatural. I assumed it was just a story meant to keep children away from dangerous places. I was wrong. Elena had been placing trail cameras along a specific migration corridor that cut through Shadow Canyon. Her research was tracking how mountain lions were adapting their territories in response to the wildfires that had burned parts of the Gila 2 years earlier. According to her field notes, which her department head shared with us, she had discovered something unusual. Several of her cameras had captured images of mountain lions actively avoiding certain areas of the canyon, even when those areas contained ideal habitat and prey. She had written in her journal, "Possible territorial marking by unknown predator species. Lions showing strong aversion to eastern cave system." Her last recorded GPS coordinates placed her near the entrance to a cave system that didn't appear on any of our maps. We assembled at the Gila Visitor Center at 5 a.m. on April 14th. The weather forecast showed clear skies with temperatures ranging from 45 to 78 degrees. We checked our equipment 3 times, as is standard procedure. Each of us carried enough supplies for 7 days in the field. Our packs weighed between 45 and 60 pounds, depending on our specific roles and the equipment required. We had 2 satellite phones, emergency beacons, first aid supplies, water purification systems, and enough ammunition to handle any wildlife encounter. We drove 2 Forest Service trucks to the eastern trailhead, arriving at 7:30 a.m. The hike to our first camping location would take approximately 6 hours, putting us at the northern rim of Shadow Canyon by mid-afternoon. The trail began as a well-maintained path through ponderosa pine forest. The morning air was cool and clear, with the scent of pine sap and dry earth. Birds called from the trees, western tanagers, mountain chickadees, and the occasional raven. We moved at a steady pace, stopping every hour for 5-minute breaks to adjust equipment and hydrate. Miguel struggled with the elevation and pace, but his determination kept him moving. By 10 a.m., the trail had narrowed and begun to descend into more rugged terrain. The ponderosa gave way to mixed oak and juniper as we lost elevation. The temperature rose to approximately 65 degrees. We encountered fresh deer tracks and mountain lion scat, which Michaela estimated to be less than 24 hours old. At noon, we stopped for a 30-minute lunch break near a small spring. Sam identified several edible plants growing nearby: wild onions, lamb's quarters, and prickly pear cactus. The water from the spring was clear and cold. We refilled our bottles after purifying the water. I noticed that there were no insect larvae or amphibians in the spring, which was unusual but not unprecedented. After lunch, we continued east, now on a game trail rather than an official hiking path. The terrain became increasingly steep as we approached the rim of Shadow Canyon. By 2 p.m., we could see the canyon stretching before us, a deep gash in the earth approximately 3 miles long and half a mile wide at its widest point. The western wall where we stood dropped nearly 800 feet to the canyon floor. The eastern wall was less sheer but still formidable. A small stream ran along the canyon bottom, visible as a thin silver line from our vantage point. We began our descent at 2:30 p.m. David took point, setting up safety lines at the steeper sections. The descent took 90 minutes, requiring technical climbing skills at several points. Miguel struggled, but with David's guidance and Sam's encouragement, he made it down safely. We reached the canyon floor at 4 p.m. and made camp in a small clearing approximately 50 yards from the stream. The canyon walls blocked the direct sunlight, creating a premature dusk in the canyon bottom. The temperature dropped to around 55 degrees. We set up 3 two-person tents in a triangle formation and built a small campfire in the center. After a meal of dehydrated camping food, we discussed our search strategy for the following day. According to Elena's notes, the cave entrance was approximately 1 mile north of our position, near where the stream emerged from the eastern canyon wall. We would begin our search there at first light. We established a watch rotation for the night, 2 hours each, with Rob taking first watch, followed by Michaela, David, Sam, and myself. Miguel was excluded from the rotation due to his inexperience. I remember that the night was unusually quiet. No owls, no insects chirping. Even the stream seemed to make less noise than it should have. I attributed this to the acoustics of the canyon, but in retrospect it was the first warning sign. We all slept poorly despite our exhaustion. Each person who took watch reported the same thing in the morning: an unnatural silence and a feeling of being watched from the darkness beyond our campfire's light. We broke camp at 6 a.m. on April 15th and headed north along the stream. The morning was cool and misty, with fog clinging to the canyon floor. The silence continued. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Even our footsteps seemed muted, as if the air itself was absorbing sound. Michaela pointed out that we had seen no animal tracks near the stream, which was highly unusual. A water source like this should have shown evidence of deer, raccoons, and other wildlife coming to drink. The stream itself contained no fish, not even the small minnows or tadpoles you would expect. The water was clear and cold, with a slightly metallic taste even after filtering. We reached the coordinates from Elena's notes at 7:45 a.m. The cave entrance was a horizontal crack in the eastern canyon wall, approximately 4 feet high and 10 feet wide. Water flowed out from it, forming the stream that ran down the canyon. Cool air emerged from the opening, carrying a faint, unidentifiable odor. Not unpleasant, but not natural either. Something like ozone and wet stone. Michaela found Elena's tracks leading into the cave. They were approximately 5 days old, partially erased by the flowing water but still visible to her trained eye. There were no tracks coming back out. We prepared to enter the cave at 8:30 a.m. David rigged safety lines and distributed climbing helmets equipped with LED headlamps. Rob checked his medical kit. Sam marked the entrance with fluorescent tape to ensure we could find our way out. I established a communication protocol. We would maintain visual contact at all times and use whistle blasts if separated. 1 blast for "Where are you?", 2 for "Come to me", 3 for emergency. We left most of our camping equipment cached outside, taking only essential survival gear, first aid supplies, water, food for 48 hours, and weapons. I carried my Forest Service-issued Remington 870 shotgun with slug and buckshot ammunition. Michaela had her Glock. Sam carried a large fixed-blade knife and a compact folding saw. David had a climbing axe that could serve as a weapon if needed. Rob and Miguel were unarmed except for standard belt knives. The cave began as a single tunnel approximately 15 feet feet wide and 7 feet high at its center. The floor was smooth stone covered with about 3 inches of flowing water. The walls showed signs of water erosion, smooth, rounded surfaces shaped over thousands of years. Our lights revealed no stalactites or stalagmites, which was unusual for a cave in this region. The air temperature was a constant 52 degrees. We proceeded in single file, Michaela on point tracking Elena's faint footprints, then myself, Miguel, Rob, Sam, and David bringing up the rear. We maintained a slow, careful pace, marking our route with reflective tape every 20 yards. The tunnel maintained a slight downward grade, taking us deeper into the earth. After approximately 400 yards, we encountered our first junction. The tunnel split into 3 separate passages. The water flowed from the center passage. Michaela determined that Elena had taken this route, so we followed. The ceiling height decreased to about 5 feet, forcing us to stoop as we walked. The tunnel walls began to show unusual characteristics, perfectly straight grooves running horizontally, as if cut by tools rather than formed by natural processes. Miguel noted this and suggested it might indicate human modification of the cave, possibly by prehistoric peoples. Approximately 800 yards from the entrance, the center tunnel opened into a large chamber about 60 feet in diameter, with a domed ceiling rising to approximately 25 feet at its center. The floor remained smooth stone, but now only the central channel contained flowing water, creating a stream about 3 feet wide that ran through the center of the chamber. The walls of this chamber showed the same horizontal grooves as the tunnel, but here they formed distinct patterns, concentric circles, and what appeared to be stylized animal forms. The beam of my flashlight wasn't powerful enough to illuminate the entire chamber at once, creating shifting shadows as we moved. 7 tunnel openings led out from this chamber, including the one we had entered through. The water flowed in from a tunnel directly opposite our entrance. This time, however, Michaela could not determine which tunnel Elena had taken. Her tracks disappeared at the edge of the water channel. We decided to rest in the chamber and discuss our next move. The time was approximately 10:15 a.m., though in the cave, without natural light, time seemed less relevant. We drank water and ate energy bars. Miguel examined the wall carvings with intense interest, photographing them with his phone. He believed they resembled Mogollon or ancient Puebloan petroglyphs, but noted significant differences in style and content. Some of the animal forms did not correspond to any known southwestern wildlife. Elongated figures with too many limbs, arranged in circular patterns around a central figure that Miguel thought might represent the sun. After 20 minutes of rest, we prepared to continue. Without Elena's tracks to follow, we needed a new strategy. I suggested we follow the water source, reasoning that Elena, as a scientist, would likely have done the same. The tunnel from which the water flowed was slightly larger than the others, approximately 8 feet high and 12 feet wide. The water tunnel maintained the same smooth, grooved walls for approximately 200 yards before opening into another, larger chamber. This one was oval rather than circular, about 100 feet long and 50 feet wide. The ceiling rose to at least 40 feet, disappearing beyond the reach of our lights. The water channel widened to about 10 feet and deepened to approximately 3 feet. The water moved more slowly here, creating a small underground pool at the chamber's center. Around this pool we found equipment, a backpack, a camera tripod, sample collection vials, and a notebook. Elena's equipment. The notebook was partially water damaged but still legible. The last entry was dated April 9th, found unusual insect specimens near water's edge. Unlike anything in taxonomic records, chitinous exoskeletons but with unexpected structural elements. Taking samples for analysis. Strange sounds coming from the northern tunnel. Going to investigate. A quick inventory of the equipment showed that her satellite phone, water filter, most of her food, and her defensive spray were still in her backpack. Whatever had drawn her away, she had expected to return quickly. Miguel grew agitated upon finding his sister's abandoned equipment. Rob managed to calm him, emphasizing that the discovery meant we were on the right track. We photographed the site and collected the notebook and other small items that might provide clues. The chamber had 5 tunnel exits, including the one we had entered through. According to Elena's notes, she had gone through what she called the northern tunnel. Using a compass, which still functioned at this depth, we identified this as a large opening approximately 10 feet in diameter at the far end of the oval chamber. Before proceeding, we ate a more substantial meal and redistributed the weight of Elena's equipment among our packs. The time was approximately noon. The northern tunnel was different from the others we had traversed. The smooth, grooved walls gave way to a more natural, rough-hewn appearance. The ceiling height varied unpredictably, sometimes forcing us to crouch, other times rising beyond the reach of our lights. The tunnel floor became irregular, with sudden drops and rises that required careful footing. The water channel continued but narrowed to about 2 feet wide and 6 inches deep. After approximately 150 yards, we noticed a change in the air. Warmer, more humid, with that same unidentifiable odor now stronger. The silence, which had been a constant companion since we entered the canyon, intensified. The sound of our breathing and footsteps seemed to travel only a few feet before being absorbed by the dead air. And then we heard it, a low, rhythmic humming that seemed to come from the stone itself, not mechanical, not animal. Something between the two, vibrations we felt more than heard. Michaela was the first to notice that small pebbles on the tunnel floor were trembling in time with the humming. The tunnel descended more steeply for another 100 yards before opening into a vast underground space too large for our lights to illuminate completely. We stood at the edge of what appeared to be a cliff, overlooking a cavern of immense proportions. The humming was louder here, reverberating from all directions. The air was noticeably warmer, perhaps 65 degrees, and carried that same strange scent, now mixed with something organic, like decaying vegetation, but not quite putrid. Our lights revealed that we stood on a ledge about 20 feet above the cavern floor. To our right, a natural stone ramp provided a way down. The floor of the cavern appeared to be covered with a layer of fine, dark sand or soil, unlike the stone surfaces we had traversed until now. Water trickled down from our tunnel to join what sounded like a larger underground stream somewhere in the darkness to our left. But what caught our immediate attention were the structures. Rising from the cavern floor were dozens of column-like formations, roughly cylindrical but with irregular surfaces. They ranged in height from approximately 5 to 15 feet and in diameter from 2 to 4 feet. They were not stalactites or stalagmites. Their shape was too regular, their placement too ordered. They formed concentric circles around a central point we couldn't yet see. The material appeared to be neither stone nor wood, but something with the texture of dried clay mixed with fibrous material. David suggested they might be mineral formations created by some unusual geothermal process. Miguel disagreed, stating they resembled insect structures, specifically the nest columns built by certain termite species, but on a massive scale. Michaela remained silent, her flashlight beam fixed on the cavern floor, where she had noticed something more immediate. Tracks, human footprints leading down the stone ramp and across the dark soil toward the central structures. Elena's tracks, less than a week old. We descended the ramp at 1:45 p.m., stepping carefully on the loose soil of the cavern floor. The material underfoot was not sand or dirt, but something finer, almost powdery, that released a musty odor when disturbed. Michaela led, following Elena's tracks with her flashlight beam constantly sweeping the area ahead. The column structures became more numerous as we advanced, forming a maze-like environment that limited visibility to about 20 feet in any direction. The humming intensified, now accompanied by periodic pulses of deeper tones that we could feel in our chests. The columns were not solid as they had appeared from a distance, but covered with intricate patterns of holes ranging from pinprick-sized to large enough to insert a fist. Miguel examined one closely, his scientific curiosity temporarily overriding his concern for his sister. He noted that the material resembled a mixture of clay and what appeared to be masticated vegetable matter, similar to paper wasp construction, but with an unidentifiable binding agent. Elena's tracks led us deeper into the maze of columns, toward what we presumed was the center of the cavern. After approximately 10 minutes of careful progress, we reached a circular clearing about 30 feet in diameter. The columns formed a perfect ring around this space, like pillars supporting an invisible ceiling. At the center of the clearing was a depression in the floor, a shallow bowl about 15 feet across and 3 feet deep at its center. The bowl contained a pool of viscous liquid that reflected our lights with an oily sheen. The surface of the liquid undulated slightly, though there was no breeze to disturb it. The movement seemed to synchronize with the pulsing hum that surrounded us. Elena's tracks led directly to the edge of this pool, where they abruptly ended. Miguel called his sister's name. his voice echoing strangely in the cavern. The humming briefly intensified, then returned to its previous rhythm. Rob suggested we collect a sample of the liquid for analysis. He approached the pool with a sample vial from his medical kit. As he knelt at the edge, he suddenly went rigid. I called his name, but he didn't respond. His flashlight beam remained fixed on something in the liquid. I moved to his side and followed his gaze. Beneath the oily surface was a face. Elena's face, eyes closed as if sleeping, her dark hair floating around her head like seaweed. My shout brought the others rushing forward. Miguel had to be physically restrained by Sam and David to prevent him from jumping into the pool. I trained my shotgun on the liquid, though I had no idea what I would be shooting at. Rob snapped out of his trance and began preparing his medical gear, though his hands shook visibly. Michaela stood slightly apart, her flashlight beam sweeping the columns around us, her posture tense and alert. That's when we heard the scratching. A dry, chitinous sound, like thousands of insect legs moving across stone. It came from the columns around us, from inside the hundreds of holes that dotted their surfaces. Michaela's light caught movement, something dark and segmented withdrawing into one of the larger openings. Then another, and another. The humming changed pitch, becoming higher, more agitated. The liquid in the pool began to ripple more vigorously. Elena's face disappeared beneath the surface. Miguel broke free from Sam's grip and rushed forward, dropping to his knees at the pool's edge. Before anyone could stop him, he plunged his arm into the liquid. What happened next occurred too quickly for any of us to react effectively. The liquid surged upward, engulfing Miguel's arm to the shoulder. He screamed, not in pain but in shock. The substance had the consistency of thick honey but moved with purpose, climbing his arm rather than simply clinging to it. Rob and I grabbed Miguel's free arm and torso, pulling him backward. The substance resisted, stretching like taffy but maintaining its grip. Sam drew his knife and attempted to cut the material, but the blade passed through without effect. The substance continued to climb, reaching Miguel's neck and face. His screams became muffled, then stopped. The weight suddenly tripled, as if something solid had formed within the flowing mass. It took all three of us pulling with maximum effort to extract Miguel from the pool. When we finally dragged him clear, the substance retracted rapidly, slipping off his body and back into the pool like water down a drain. Miguel lay unconscious but breathing. His skin was unmarked, showing no burns, cuts, or any sign of injury. His vital signs were stable when Rob checked them. His clothes were dry, as if the liquid had never touched him. While Rob attended to Miguel, the rest of us formed a defensive perimeter around them. Our lights pointed outward toward the columns. The scratching sounds had intensified. Now we could see movement in many of the holes, dark, segmented limbs withdrawing when caught in our light beams. The humming had changed to a higher pitch that made my teeth ache. David suggested a strategic retreat. We would carry Miguel back the way we had come, return to the surface, and bring back a larger team with more equipment. It was a sound plan. We never got the chance to execute it. The attack came from above. Something dropped from the darkness beyond our light beams, landing directly on David's shoulders. In my flashlight beam, I caught a glimpse of a segmented body, multiple limbs, and what appeared to be a head split by mandibles. The creature was approximately the size of a large dog, but shaped like nothing I had ever seen. Part insect, part arachnid, but with proportions that made no evolutionary sense. David screamed and fell backward, the creature's weight driving him to the ground. His helmet came off, and his headlamp shattered against a rock. Sam lunged forward with his knife, driving it into the creature's body. A clear, yellowish fluid sprayed from the wound, splattering Sam's face and chest. The creature made no sound but released its grip on David and scuttled into the darkness with impossible speed. David was alive but injured. 4 parallel lacerations ran from his right shoulder to his lower back, tearing through his jacket and the shirt beneath. The wounds were clean, precise, as if cut with a razor rather than torn by claws. Rob immediately began treatment, applying pressure bandages and administering an injectable painkiller from his kit. Sam wiped the yellowish fluid from his face, reporting a burning sensation on his skin. Rob instructed him to rinse immediately with water from his canteen. Miguel remained unconscious. The tactical situation had deteriorated rapidly. We had 2 injured team members, limited visibility, and an unknown number of hostile organisms surrounding us. I made the decision to retreat immediately. We fashioned a makeshift stretcher for Miguel using 2 collapsible trekking poles and our jackets. David could walk with assistance from Sam. I took point, shotgun ready, with Michaela covering our rear. We moved as quickly as possible back the way we had come, Following the trail of reflective tape we had left, the scratching sounds followed us, always just beyond the reach of our lights. Twice I fired warning shots when the sounds grew too close, the shotgun blasts deafening in the confined space. The creatures seemed to retreat temporarily after each shot, but soon resumed their pursuit. We reached the stone ramp leading up to the tunnel and began the ascent. David stumbled halfway up, crying out as his wounds reopened. Sam caught him before he could fall. As they regained their balance, Sam's flashlight beam swept across the cavern floor behind us. Hundreds of the creatures had emerged from the columns, covering the dark soil like a living carpet. They ranged in size from as small as a human hand to larger than a wolf. All shared the same basic structure: segmented bodies, too many limbs, heads dominated by mandibles, and multiple eyes that reflected our lights with a dull red glow. They moved with coordinated purpose, flowing around the columns like water around rocks. They had not yet begun to climb the ramp, but they were massing at its base, their bodies piling on top of one another. The humming had risen to an almost unbearable pitch. Michaela fired 3 rounds from her Glock into the mass. The creatures scattered momentarily, then resumed their advance. We continued up the ramp and into the tunnel, moving as fast as our injured companions allowed. The journey back through the northern tunnel was a nightmare of shadows and scuttling sounds. The creatures did not follow us immediately into the tunnel, but we could hear them moving inside the walls, through cracks too small for us to see. Occasionally, one would drop from the ceiling or emerge from a fissure in the floor. Michaela dispatched these with precise shots from her Glock until she ran out of ammunition. I used the shotgun sparingly, aware that each blast in the confined tunnel risked a cave-in. Sam had taken over carrying Miguel entirely, as David's condition had worsened. Rob alternated between checking on our injured and watching our flanks with a powerful flashlight. We reached the oval chamber with Elena's equipment at approximately 3:30 p.m., though time had become meaningless in the perpetual darkness. We paused briefly to reorient ourselves and choose the correct tunnel for our exit. That's when Miguel regained consciousness. He sat up suddenly on Sam's shoulders, nearly causing Sam to drop him. His eyes were open but unfocused, his pupils dilated to the point that his irises were barely visible. He began to speak in a voice that was his but somehow not his, deeper, with an odd resonance that matched the humming that had followed us from the cavern. He spoke in fragmented sentences about the old ones who sleep beneath and those who tend the nest. He described beings that had lived in the earth since before the warm bloods walked upright, entities that awakened periodically to feed and expand their domain. Miguel's words became increasingly disjointed, but one phrase he repeated clearly: "They have tasted us now. They remember the taste." Then he convulsed violently and lost consciousness again. Rob checked Miguel's vital signs, reporting elevated heart rate and temperature. He suspected some kind of toxin or psychoactive substance had been introduced to Miguel's system when he touched the pool. Without proper medical equipment, there was little he could do beyond basic supportive care. We had to get back to the surface quickly. We chose the tunnel through which we had originally entered the oval chamber and proceeded at the fastest pace we could manage with our injured. The sounds of pursuit continued behind us, the scratching in the walls, sometimes so close that I imagined I could feel the vibrations through my boots. We reached the domed chamber with the 7 tunnels at approximately 4:15 p.m. Here we faced the critical decision: which of the 7 tunnels would lead us back to the entrance? Our reflective tape markers should have shown us the way, but they were gone. Every single piece we had placed on our inward journey had been removed. Michaela examined the tunnel openings, trying to identify our original path by footprints or other signs. The water channel that had guided us inward still flowed, but it now seemed to be coming from a different tunnel than the one I remembered entering through. The concentric circle patterns on the walls seemed to have shifted, creating a disorienting effect. David, now feverish from his injuries, insisted that the patterns were actually moving slowly, rotating around the chamber. I dismissed this as delirium until I noticed it myself. The grooved circles were indeed rotating clockwise, though so slowly that it was barely perceptible. The rock itself was moving, reshaping the chamber as we watched. Michaela identified what she believed was our entry tunnel based on scuff marks on the stone floor that matched our boot patterns. We entered this tunnel at approximately 4:30 p.m., moving as quickly as possible. The sounds of pursuit had momentarily faded, but the humming remained, now seeming to come from the stone all around us. After approximately 200 yards, the tunnel split into two branches, neither of which matched my memory of our inward journey. The water channel continued down the left branch, so we followed it. The tunnel narrowed and the ceiling lowered until we were walking in single file, stooping to avoid hitting our heads. The air became noticeably colder and the humming faded to a barely perceptible vibration. After another 300 yards, the tunnel opened into a small chamber about 20 feet in diameter. With the ceiling just high enough to stand upright, there was no exit except the way we had come. We had taken a wrong turn. We would need to backtrack to the junction and try the right branch. As we turned to retrace our steps, a section of the wall behind us shifted. The stone flowed like thick liquid, opening a new passage that had not existed moments before. The scratching sounds returned, now directly behind us in the tunnel through which we had entered. We had no choice but to take the newly opened path. This tunnel was different from any we had traversed before, perfectly smooth, as if cut by precision tools, and sloping steeply upward. The ceiling was exactly 6 feet high, forcing Sam and myself to stoop slightly. The floor was dry, with no water channel to follow. We moved quickly, hearing the sounds of pursuit grow louder behind us. After approximately 150 yards of steep climbing, the tunnel leveled out and widened into another chamber, this one rectangular and filled with a pale, bioluminescent light that emanated from fungus-like growths on the walls. The light was sufficient for us to switch off our headlamps to conserve battery power. The chamber contained what appeared to be stone furniture, bench-like projections along the walls and a table-like structure in the center. On this table lay 3 objects that were immediately recognizable: a camera, a water bottle, and a sample collection kit. Elena's equipment, different from what we had found in the oval chamber. These items were arranged in a precise line, evenly spaced, as if placed there deliberately for us to find. Miguel, still unconscious, began to twitch and mutter at the sight of his sister's possessions. The chamber had 3 exits, the tunnel through which we had entered, and 2 identical openings in the wall opposite. Both of these new tunnels appeared to slope upward, potentially leading to the surface. The scratching sounds grew louder behind us. We had seconds to choose. Michaela quickly examined both openings and pointed to the right one without explanation. We trusted her tracking instincts and entered this tunnel, which was similar to the one that had brought us to the rectangular chamber, smooth, precisely cut, and sloping upward at a steady grade. After approximately 100 yards, the tunnel bent sharply to the left and continued upward at a steeper angle. The bioluminescent fungi became less common, forcing us to switch our headlamps back on. The air felt slightly fresher, with hints of the outside world, pine resin, soil, natural dampness. We had been moving continuously for over an hour when disaster struck. David, who had been growing weaker, suddenly collapsed. His breathing was shallow and rapid, his skin burning with fever. The wounds on his back had stopped bleeding, but now showed signs of infection. The edges were swollen and discolored with a greenish tinge. Rob administered the last of his injectable antibiotics, but his expression made it clear that he considered the situation dire. David needed a hospital, and even that might not be enough. After a brief consultation, we made the difficult decision to continue upward with David on the stretcher we had been using for Miguel, who was now able to walk with assistance despite his semi-conscious state. Sam and I would alternate carrying David. The tunnel continued upward for what seemed like endless miles, though the actual distance was probably less than 1. The slope grew steeper, requiring us to use natural handholds in the walls to maintain our balance. The scratching sounds had faded, though the sense of pursuit remained. Eventually, the tunnel widened and the ceiling rose, allowing us to stand upright. The air grew noticeably fresher, with a distinct breeze flowing down from above, and then, miraculously, we saw it. Natural light, a pale glow filtering down from what appeared to be an opening about 50 yards ahead. We increased our pace, desperate to reach the surface. The tunnel ended in a vertical shaft approximately 15 feet high, with natural light visible at the top. Roots hung down from the opening, and I could see blue sky beyond them. We had found a way out, though not the entrance through which we had come in. David fashioned a climbing system using the ropes and equipment he had been carrying despite his injured state. Sam, being the strongest, went up first. He secured the rope at the top, then helped lift David, who was now unconscious, using a pulley system. Miguel went next, then Rob, then Michaela. I came up last, retrieving the climbing equipment as I ascended. We emerged into a late afternoon sunlight on a steep hillside covered in juniper and pinon pine. The cave opening was concealed beneath the root system of a large, lightning-damaged ponderosa pine. Without knowing exactly what we were looking for, it would have been nearly impossible to find from the outside. According to Michaela's GPS unit, which she had kept in a waterproof case, we were approximately 2 miles northeast of where we had entered the cave system. The sun was low in the west, suggesting it was around 6 p.m. We had spent nearly 10 hours underground. David's condition was critical. His breathing had become irregular, and the infection in his wounds had spread visibly, with green-black lines extending outward from the lacerations like roots. Rob estimated that he had hours at most without proper medical treatment. We needed to reach civilization quickly. The nearest road was approximately 5 miles to the east, according to Michaela's map. Even at our best pace, it would take us at least 3 hours to reach it, carrying David and supporting Miguel. We fashioned a more secure stretcher for David using branches and rope, then began the difficult journey east. The terrain was rugged, steep slopes covered in loose rock and dense vegetation. Miguel's condition fluctuated. Sometimes he seemed almost normal, helping with navigation and asking lucid questions about his sister. Other times, he would lapse into trance-like states, muttering phrases in what sounded like multiple languages, none of which any of us recognized. The sun set around 7:30 p.m., forcing us to use our headlamps again. We continued through the darkness, taking frequent brief rests but never stopping for more than a few minutes. The night was clear and cold, with temperatures dropping to around 40 degrees. We heard normal forest sounds: owls, the rustle of small nocturnal animals, the occasional distant call of a coyote. These ordinary sounds were reassuring after the unnatural silence of the canyon and the cave. At approximately 11 p.m., David died. One moment he was breathing, the next he wasn't. There was no struggle, no final words, just a transition from life to stillness so subtle that Rob didn't notice until he checked David's pulse during a rest break. We were about 2 miles from the road. After a brief discussion, we made the difficult decision to continue rather than remain with David's body. We covered him with a space blanket and marked the location on Michaela's GPS. We would return for him once we had reached safety and obtained help for Miguel, whose condition was deteriorating. We continued east, our pace slowing due to exhaustion and the emotional weight of David's death. Around 1 a.m. on April 16th, we reached the road, a rarely used Forest Service access route, unpaved but wide enough for vehicles. There was no traffic at that hour, and the nearest ranger station was 15 miles north. We decided to keep moving along the road, hoping to encounter a vehicle or reach a point where cell phone service might be available. We walked north for approximately 2 hours, taking turns supporting Miguel, who was now alternating between periods of lucidity and concerning episodes where he spoke in that resonant voice about the nest and those who wait. Around 3 a.m., Michaela's phone suddenly showed 1 bar of service. She immediately dialed 911, but the call dropped before she could speak to an operator. We continued another half mile until she had 2 bars, then tried again. This time the call connected, and she was able to request emergency assistance, providing our location from the GPS unit. We were told that help would arrive in approximately 1 hour. We found a small clearing just off the road and made Miguel as comfortable as possible. Rob checked his vital signs, reporting elevated heart rate, fever, and dilated pupils. Miguel seemed unaware of his surroundings now, his gaze fixed on something none of us could see. The rest of us collapsed from exhaustion, taking turns staying awake to watch for the emergency vehicles and to monitor Miguel's condition. I took the first watch. The forest around us was quiet but not silent, normal night sounds that I had taken for granted before, but now found immensely comforting. The stars overhead were brilliant in the clear mountain air, the Milky Way a bright smear across the black. I remembered childhood nights spent looking at those same stars with my father and grandmother, learning both the scientific names of constellations and the Apache stories about them. Around 4:15 a.m., I noticed something strange. The normal forest sounds, insects, distant animals, the rustle of wind in the trees, had stopped. The silence that had followed us in Shadow Canyon had returned. Miguel, who had been lying still, suddenly sat upright, his eyes wide and unfocused. He turned his head slowly as if tracking something moving through the trees around us. Then he spoke, not in the resonant voice of earlier, but in his own voice, thin with fear. "They followed us. They're here." I woke the others immediately. Sam reached for his knife. Rob moved to Miguel's side, trying to calm him. Michaela scanned the darkness beyond the clearing with her flashlight. The attack came from all directions at once. The creatures burst from the underbrush, the same segmented, many-limbed organisms we had seen in the cave, ranging from dog-sized to smaller than rats. They moved with terrible speed and purpose, flowing across the ground like a living tide. Michaela fired her last 2 bullets before they overwhelmed her. I heard her scream once, then saw her lifted bodily into the air by multiple creatures, vanishing into the darkness between one heartbeat and the next. Sam fought with his knife, slashing at anything that came within reach. He killed several of the smaller creatures before a larger one clamped its mandibles around his wrist. The knife fell from suddenly nerveless fingers. Sam was gone in seconds, dragged into the darkness so quickly that I couldn't even track the direction. Rob grabbed Miguel and pulled him toward the road, shouting for me to follow. I fired my remaining shotgun shells into the mass of creatures, creating momentary gaps in their advance. Then my gun was empty, just dead weight in my hands. I drew my belt knife and ran after Rob and Miguel. We reached the road, but the creatures were all around us now, emerging from the forest on both sides. Rob pushed Miguel toward me, shouting, "Run!" Then he turned to face the oncoming wave, armed with nothing but a fallen branch. I grabbed Miguel's arm and ran north along the road, not looking back at what happened to Rob. The sounds told me enough. His screams lasted approximately 8 seconds. Miguel and I ran until his legs gave out. He collapsed on the road, convulsing violently. I tried to lift him, but he was rigid, his body locked in some kind of seizure. The creatures were behind us, their chitinous limbs clicking on the gravel road surface. I could see their eye shine in my flashlight beam, dozens of dull red reflections moving steadily closer. Miguel's convulsions stopped suddenly. He looked up at me with perfect clarity and said, "You can't save me, they already have me. Save yourself." Then his eyes rolled back and that other voice emerged, deeper and resonant. "They remember the taste. They will find the others. I made a choice I will regret for the rest of my life." I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to buckle. I ran until the flashlight batteries died, leaving me in darkness, broken only by starlight. I ran until the road turned to pavement, until I saw headlights in the distance, until a pickup truck driven by a rancher heading to an early shift found me collapsed in the middle of the road at 5:43 a.m. I don't remember much after that. Fragments of ambulance lights, emergency room ceilings, doctors' concerned faces. I told my story over and over, to paramedics, to doctors, to Forest Service officials, to state police. Most didn't believe me. Some humored me. A few seemed genuinely disturbed. Search parties were organized. They found David's body where we had left it. They never found Michaela, Sam, or Rob. They found Miguel 3 days later, walking alone on the Forest Service road, severely dehydrated but otherwise physically unharmed. He had no memory of anything that had happened after entering the cave. He still doesn't. The official investigation concluded that we had become disoriented in an unmarked cave system. David died from wounds sustained in a fall. Michaela, Sam, and Rob were presumed to have become separated and succumbed to exposure or similar hazards. Miguel's temporary memory loss and my delusions were attributed to oxygen deprivation and psychological trauma. They never found Elena's body. They never found the cave entrance beneath the Ponderosa. When teams investigated the entrance we had originally used, they found it blocked by a cave-in that geologists estimated had occurred decades ago, making it impossible for us to have entered that way at all. The insect specimens in Elena's sample vials were identified as previously undocumented arthropod species, but nothing resembling what I described. The case was eventually closed, filed away as a tragic accident resulting from inadequate preparation and natural hazards. I left the Forest Service a month later. I moved to Colorado, changed my name, took a job as a hardware store clerk. I avoid the wilderness now. I sleep with the lights on. I wake up at 3:17 a.m. every night, hearing that humming in my walls. I installed concrete floors in my basement because I couldn't bear the thought of only a thin layer of wood separating me from the earth below. I've tried therapy. I've tried medication. Nothing helps. The doctors diagnosed PTSD, which is technically correct but fundamentally inadequate. How do you process trauma when the source of that trauma shouldn't exist? How do you recover from something the world insists was just in your head? 3 months ago, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, a trail camera image showing a familiar figure standing at the mouth of a dark cave. Elena Vega, alive, looking directly at the camera with an expression I cannot describe as anything but hunger. The timestamp showed it was taken 2 weeks after we found her face in that underground pool. I burned the photograph. A week later, I received another envelope containing a small vial of yellowish fluid and a note in Miguel's handwriting. They're spreading. Shadow Canyon was just one nest. Grandmother was right. I haven't heard from him since. I check the news regularly for reports of missing hikers in the Gila. There have been 6 in the past year. I visited my grandmother on the reservation last month. She's 92 now and blind, but her mind remains sharp. I didn't tell her what happened, but somehow she knew. She took my hand and spoke in Apache for several minutes. She told me the old stories about the ones who live beneath, who were here before humans, who build their nests in the deep places and emerge periodically to hunt. She said they taste the blood of those they catch and remember it forever. They can follow that taste across any distance. They can take your shape, wear your skin, speak with your voice, but they cannot enter your home unless invited. She gave me a small leather pouch containing herbs and other materials I couldn't identify. I hang it above my door now. I don't believe it will help, but I don't disbelieve either. If you're planning to hike in the Gila wilderness, stay on the marked trails. Don't explore unmarked caves. Don't investigate strange sounds. If you find yourself in a place where the birds stop singing and the insects fall silent, leave immediately. If you hear a humming that seems to come from the earth itself, run. And if you meet a wildlife researcher named Elena Vega, or a science teacher named Miguel Vega, or anyone who looks exactly like a friend you know should be somewhere else, don't follow them. Don't listen to them. Don't let them into your home. They remember the taste. They're spreading, and Shadow Canyon was just one nest.